Welcome to the Two Gurus Talk Compliance podcast with me, Kristy Grant-Hart. I'm here with the one and only Tom Fox. This week we're covering whether there is a new world order of bribery prosecutors, new concerns about transcribing all of our meetings with AI, companies stuck in a web of fines for worker compliance issues, and Florida man's naked trip to the tanning bed before being arrested. But first, Tom, how has your week been and what do you think is the most interesting development?
Today was very good because I got tickets to both Sir Paul McCartney and the Savannah Bananas. Doesn't get
Now,
much better
we
than
asked
that.
this question. Tell our listeners who may not be familiar with the Savannah Bananas what exactly that is.
The Savannah Bananas are America's most popular professional baseball team, and they tour the country playing banana ball.
Fantastic. Congratulations. You're going to have to report back on how fantastic the Savannah Bananas were. Where do you want to start, Tom? Is there a new world order? This is a big statement.
It is. The story comes to us from Reuters. It's actually something that we have talked about several times on this podcast, and it's a combination of factors of the Trump administration's reimagining or reprioritizing anti-corruption efforts, not to include anti-corruption, but the rest of the world or some parts of the rest of the world picking up that deficit. Now, once again, that part's not new. We have England, France, and Switzerland. But Reuters wrote it in the angle of literally what you said, a new world order in the title. And I thought that was provocative enough that maybe we could explore what that might mean for American companies. Just today, the Treasury Department froze the assets of a judge in Brazil who is presiding over the treason trial of the last president of Brazil who tried to overthrow the government.
Huh.
And so we have the U.S. engaging in some very specific political acts in the form of sanctions. This is not against Russian oligarchs. This is against a judge. And they froze his assets in the United States. Query how much that's going to be. Nevertheless, what I fear, Kristy, is it will be the start of a tit-for-tat retaliation. And I don't know your current client list because you have a new client list at Diligent, but I'm pretty sure you have some Brazilian clients. And I know you've done work in Latin America for literally years. And they have been long friends of ours, long friends of America and the fight against corruption, certainly since Jata. And now we're turning against them because they don't like the current administration's politics or a judicial proceeding. Well, what happens when the Brits or the French or, heaven forbid, the Swiss come to that conclusion, or really any other country? I have been waiting for Chinese prosecution of U.S. companies or U.S. individuals for corruption. China has barred a Wells Fargo and a U.S. government employee from leaving the country. And that does not portend well. And I think a new world order will bring a literal reordering of prosecutions, and we will see many more U.S. companies under a gun and or scrutiny than than we had seen under prior administrations because of the United States abdication of its responsibility in the international fight against bribery and corruption.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Tom, the way that you looked at this, because the article itself seemed to me to be very UK focused in terms of what the UK might do, what Europe might do. And the article was weirdly, in my opinion, optimistic about the United States revised June 9th, I think it was, guidance on FCPA prosecution and the focus on transnational criminal organizations and whatnot. I guess I'm just a jaded person at this point. I found it unreasonably optimistic. But perhaps there will be I'm not usually the cynic here, but perhaps there will be a new world order. I don't know. I'm just not sure. Do you think that we can, in compliance, take solace in the idea that there will be prosecutions and this will be a thing again? I think you're right. If there are, it will be much more focused against the United States and United States companies. But do you think that this will emerge?
Remember, under the Trump administration, they will prosecute non-U.S. companies who won bids for work outside the United States, allegedly because of bribery and corruption issues, which may violate the FCPA. If we're going to take the loss of a bid as the starting point on whether or not to initiate an investigation. I can quickly see where this might be going, but also think about, and once again, I'll draw on your experience of living in the United Kingdom for, I think, 10 years. The Serious Fraud Office has a very different head now. He's an ex-policeman, or maybe he's still a policeman, but he's head of the Serious Fraud Office. So he has a very different prosecutorial mentality than a prosecutor or someone else. And I think he believes his job is to investigate, which is what the police do. And he is engaged in dawn raids.
Yeah.
We have a more robust French prosecution group now, certainly after Airbus and their professional growth. And now Switzerland has stepped up, which I don't think anybody saw coming. Nevertheless, Switzerland seems to think it's in their interest to do. And so I really think we will see a shift. And in 4 years from now, if we have a new administration, what does that mean for a re-engaged Department of Justice with the rest of the world? I don't know.
Stay tuned, savvy listeners. In 4 years, call us and we'll tell you exactly what happened. So let's turn to a different kind of problem. And this article is from the Wall Street Journal titled Meta Directors and Shareholders Settle Privacy Suit Before Board Members Testify at Trial. So the trial was set to be a blockbuster, with testimony expected from Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg and former Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg. What was at issue? It was the never-ending saga of the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where Cambridge Analytica used the data of millions of Facebook users without their consent to influence the 2016 election. Venture capitalists and former directors were expected to be called to the stand to testify under oath about the privacy breaches and alleged failure of responsibility of Facebook with respect to user data. The case is significant because it would have been a test of corporate rights. So it was brought in the Chancery Court of Delaware, where Meta is incorporated. The suit was brought by shareholders wishing to hold the board and executives individually accountable for the issues caused by the Cambridge Analytica scandal. It sought to hold the directors responsible also for approving a $5 billion fine, which shielded CEO Mark Zuckerberg from any personal responsibility, allegedly to ensure he would remain as CEO. Tom, Meta threatened to leave Delaware and reincorporate to avoid the Chancery Court. And savvy Two Gurus listeners will know that Elon Musk moved Tesla out of Delaware because he was unhappy with the Chancery Court disapproving of his pay package. So my question to you, Tom, is do you see corporate governance rules changing in response to this, or are we going to Texas, the new Wild West of Delaware? But just side note, I am very bummed we didn't get to see this trial. I had my popcorn ready. But what do we think of this corporate governance issue?
Let's spend a little bit of time on the trial, because when you settle after one witness, somebody caved and somebody panicked, and that somebody was Meta. It wasn't the shareholders. And that's just inane, because Meta knew exactly what their witnesses were going to say. This is an adverse witness called by the plaintiff's side, and pretty clearly they didn't want this information out. If he didn't want it out, he shouldn't have let it out by letting the trial start. So I think Meta and its board look even worse, if that's possible. And yes, I guess it is. That part was just inane. One, letting it go to trial. Two, not settling it pre-trial. Three, now we have the settlement essentially after Meta caves and pays to the shareholders a lot of money, and we don't have that number yet. In terms of, though, the scrutiny brought on by Delaware, Kristy, I think this one's a little different. Certainly it's different than Elon Musk. And the case that Musk got upset about was Chancery Court judge denied him his $60 billion pay package because he said it had not been effectively or within the rules communicated to shareholders, and he voided it, or she voided it. Then Musk's side took that information back and did another vote and was awarded it again. And they thought that cured whatever ailed the problem. And the judge said, no, you don't cure a legal problem with a vote. And it's just, first of all, he lost $60 billion. So perhaps that was a valid reason to be upset, but it's just, I'm going to take my ball home. You're going to make me play by your rules. And we'll just go down to pay a bunch of money to Greg Abbott and move to Texas. That's what he did. And I don't see this case as being a reason or a part of that exodus, because this was a very old case. It was for conduct that happened in 2016. It was for the failure of the Meta board, and frankly, their Meta caving into the feds and paying $5 billion. Having said all that, if you pay an extra large settlement to avoid personal liability of the CEO, I think that's a legitimate reason to pay money on behalf of the board. But I just don't see this case as adding to the fuel of firing the fires to leave Delaware. I think it's an anomaly, as evidenced by the way Meta settled.
So surprised that they went to trial for one day and then settled. Most people would have done it before that. All right, let's go to another challenging place. What's going on with Morgan Stanley?
Kristy, this is not new conduct, but what surprised me was, one, it happened, and two, it happened from 2021 to 2024. And FINRA is now, that's the private body that oversees Wall Street, is investigating Morgan Stanley's high wealth and net worth individuals for the company's lack of appropriate level of due diligence. And I just wanted to highlight, this is not new. These rules have been around. There was billions of dollars paid in the last decade around this issue. And somehow Morgan Stanley, who was a part of all of those settlements, didn't seem to get the memo that this applies to high net worth and high value individuals. And so I was just a little aghast at one that happened from that time frame, 21 to 24. But I just wanted to re-emphasize, if we have any listeners in the financial or financial services industry, do appropriate level of due diligence on your customers.
Noted that there was a specific drive by Morgan Stanley into higher risk environments with higher risk folks. And if that's going to be the case, you need higher levels of due diligence, not lower. If we're doing a risk-based approach, that's where we go. That's what we're doing. I also thought, Tom, it's interesting that it took place in, like you said, 21 to 24. So often we see cases from OFAC or DOJ where the conduct took place 2, 3, 5, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And it's easier to say that was then, this is now, not just for the company, but for the industry as a whole. So I think that it's valuable that we get this information more in real time and keep doing that due diligence, folks. It's very important.
What do you got for us?
Oh, I love this article, Tom. This is one of my bugbears. It really is. So it's called "Now That We Can Transcribe Work Meetings and Conversations, Should We?" The conversation we need to be having. This one is from the Wall Street Journal, and the article isn't speaking of the legal perils of automatically transcribed meetings, the output of which is nearly always fully discoverable in a lawsuit or prosecutorial investigation. Puts down drum. No, this one looks at the human cost of transcription. So, what did the studies find? First, when people are in meetings, they typically take handwritten notes if there isn't an automatic note taker. So the movement of the hands on paper actually works in your brain to reinforce key ideas. And when people rely on the transcripts for memorization of the important parts, they may not be able to pinpoint those key moments or even remember what their assignment was. So this leads to even more inefficient meetings. What else? Unsurprisingly, people are much more guarded when they know AI is recording their every word. So they are less likely to toss out ideas at the risk of having something in the record that either wasn't liked or maybe they felt dumb about it later. So they're less risky about sharing ideas. And the worst outcome of AI transcription from a human perspective is an undermining of trust, which I found interesting. So people don't have the easy conversations at the beginning of the meetings when they know that AI is recording. Small talk may not seem meaningful, but asking about someone's vacation or how was the new lunch place creates bonds and trust. So losing that loses something very human that can make corporate culture better with people getting along. So Tom, I was thinking here at Spark Compliance, we don't record any meetings with clients or interviews for risk assessment or program assessments. It would be much more quick, but I know that our clients don't want to be fully recorded when they're telling me what's wrong with their program. The interviews aren't candid if they know they're being recorded word for word. And I am certainly more guarded when I know the meeting is being recorded. So I think companies, frankly, are just being too cavalier in rolling out auto transcription without considering the human element. What do you think about this?
I have a little bit different perspective. I firmly believe that if it comes out of my mouth, I'm responsible for it. And so I better watch out what comes out. And that typically doesn't tend to make me more guarded. It tends to make me say less stupid things or less sarcastic things, perhaps. It would be even a better phrase. I don't cuss in a business meeting unless appropriate. And I don't direct my anger at any individual. So I try to have some modicum of proper meeting etiquette. And I really fall back on the legal side of this much more than the human side, because as a lawyer, I know once you get those meeting notes, not everyone has meeting etiquette discipline. So particularly non-lawyers. I feel like I always agree to that if someone asks me if they can do that. And so it's just difficult for me as a non-civilian, i.e. lawyer, to analyze this in any way other than legal. But I have to acknowledge what you've said is a real thing. So I don't know where I shake out on it. I'm okay with it. So I think everybody should be okay with it. But according to your article and the concerns you have voiced, and perhaps even the meeting etiquette practices of the former Smart Consulting, it's not so clear.
All right, I'm going to jump on board and say it is not that I'm against any AI recorded meetings, including my marketing team, and I always have them recorded. I'm not worried about etiquette, but I do think that it may stifle creativity in meetings where people are trying to get new and different ideas out there. All right, we'll agree to disagree for now. Let's go to China. What's happening over there?
I had to do this. I don't think you remember this from when the first time it came out. But if you watched television in the early 70s, you were in love with Kung Fu. It was one of the great TV shows of the early 70s. And it was about a Shaolin priest who came to America and he righted wrongs and he used Kung Fu. And it was David Carradine was the actor who was not Asian, but he shaved his head and he played one very cool character called Grasshopper. And he came from the Shaolin Temple in China, which is, for reasons we'll explain, the most famous Shaolin Temple or temple in China. And 7-Eleven had a commercial where the character was called Weed Hoppa. So in high school, we would call each other Weed Hoppa. It was so ubiquitous. And of course, there was Kung Fu fighting and there was Kung Fu cartoons. And it was a very interesting evolution of American appreciation of Chinese martial arts. The Shaolin Temple, I've been to the Shaolin Temple. A lot of Americans have been there simply because it's known. And it's well known because it had a monk, one Abbot Shi Yongjin, although I'm sure I butchered that, who ran it and created literally a worldwide global brand for Shaolin Temple. And a lot of people have heard of it. And even if they weren't alive when they or weren't watching television, perhaps when the original Kung Fu
Wasn't alive, Tom.
I
Sorry.
wasn't alive. Okay, I didn't want to presuppose. Nevertheless, it is the most well known in the West of Chinese temples, Buddhist temples. The monk turned out to have been incredibly corrupt, and he engaged in corruption. He had taken payments. He had fathered several children while maintaining celibacy. I still haven't figured that one out. Yeah. And so I just had to bring this up. He was investigated both by the Buddhist religion inside China and Chinese authorities. He has been arrested and he's now been removed. And Grasshopper is probably turning over in wherever he is right now because his temple has been desecrated by the actions of the CEO monk.
Yeah. No, Tom, this article was really fun. I don't know, fun is for the wrong thing, what we cover here. Like, my favorite detail in the article had to be that he was criticized over the temple's planned role in a $300 million Kung Fu theme park in Australia. So There we go. Unfortunately, I don't think there is a $380 million theme park in Australia dedicated to Kung Fu, but we can make that happen. I'm sure of it. Okay. Shall we go back across the pond again? This is from the UK. My next article is from the BBC, and it's titled Barclays Fined Millions Over Financial Crime Risk Lapses. This is another one of these, seriously, folks, come on. This is an old anti-money laundering due diligence failure, but it's not old because it cost the bank £42 million. The fine relates to failures of monitoring money laundering controls and our friend due diligence. The first one of these fines, the big one, was failure to have ongoing monitoring of an account belonging to a company called Stunt & Co., who in 1 year received $46.8 million from a multi-million pound money laundering operation. And the other fine was related to a company called Wealth Tech. Barclays didn't do a simple check that would have found that Wealth Tech was not permitted by the Financial Conduct Authority to have client money or hold client money. So failure to carry out that one check did cost Barclays millions. Barclays was given significantly reduced fines because of extensive cooperation and self-reporting of the incident. Good job on that. But Tom, I think this is another clear lesson to compliance officers, especially you got to have your AML controls in place. And the continuous monitoring piece, I think is interesting because we do still see a lot of companies here in our consulting practice that don't have good continuous monitoring. And we see the one and done. And we also, OFAC has been really jumping up and down on multiple times in different enforcement actions about continuous monitoring. Do you think the message hasn't gotten through, or is it just harder than people want it to be?
I want to go in a little bit different direction here because what intrigued me was the bank, Barclays. They have had a series of missteps. They've had a culture of, if not corruption, certainly one that they don't feel the rules apply to them. And they had a CEO named Jeff Stanley who's been in the news for a lot of reasons. Most recently, his lifetime ban on banking, working in the UK banking industry, was upheld for other reasons unrelated to his actions at Barclays, along the lines of trying to unmask a whistleblower who reported through the anonymous whistleblowing reporting system within the company. And so I guess what struck me is just the culture. I don't want to call it corrupt because I'm sure there's some very good people there, but they have a culture which either allows ethical lapses or allows overrides of controls, policies, and procedures designed to prevent them. And unfortunately, here we are, 42 million yet again with Barclays, and they just can't seem to get their culture right. And if you look at someone like ABB, who back in, I think it was near the end of 22 or 23, and they had a massive FCPA enforcement action, when they were the first three-time loser, they took a significant look at themselves and said, what allowed us to do this? Not what policies did we have wrong, not what controls were insufficient. They said, it's inside us. What is wrong with us? And I think Barclays needs to take that serious self-introspection as well.
Hopefully it will. And maybe it would have if it had this interesting thing that process that NASA does, Tom. What do you want to talk about NASA for?
So this one is just, this shows the inanity of the Trump administration. They are scoffing safety concerns or discussion of safety at NASA, obviously for political reasons, because they don't want any dissent. I would suggest to you that NASA may be one of the most visible agencies in the United States, meaning when there's a disaster, everyone sees it on television. And NASA has had some horrible disasters, and we are both aware of the loss of life in both Challenger and as far back as Apollo 1. And NASA has tried to create a culture which allows literally anyone from the shop floor to the boardroom to raise safety concerns. And that seems to be going away under this administration. And if that's all correct, it's not going to be very long before we have a catastrophic disaster in space, disaster on the launching pad, disaster somewhere in training. Astronauts lost their lives in training over the years as well. And so safety has to be number one at NASA, and you cannot squash safety. And this is just emblematic of the Trump administration, I think, saying safety is not politically important to us, so we are going to not allow that robust discussion that NASA is known for. And NASA employees are really raising these concerns. If you can't talk about safety at NASA, I don't know what you can talk about.
I thought that the actual mechanism was really interesting in this article. It appeared to say that there was a formal mechanism where people could raise dissent or concerns that were being responded to in a public way. So I think that actually is really interesting. If you have that mechanism available to you, whistleblowing is one thing, but being able to have a more open discussion from a policy perspective, I thought was interesting. So who knows? You never know. It could go well. I'm just going to throw it out there. It's possible.
There
See,
you go.
not my cynic, my optimist, right, with NASA. I think all of us, I was alive for the Challenger disaster, and I remember all the discussion about O-rings and people agreeing to nobody said anything. So I think that this is a moment where they can revisit why we have that at that organization. All right, Tom, it's conference season soon. I love me some conference season. I really do. It's just about that time of year where the leaves turn and conference center doors open. Friends of the pod, Mary Shirley and Penny Milner-Smith wrote this great article in Corporate Compliance Insights, shedding light on how to have the best conference experience. And they came up with some very clever ideas. They said that you need to divide and conquer if you're going with your team or your friends. Now, people tend to want to stick together with the folks they know, but if someone is on the team with you, plan to go to separate sessions and meet up to share notes. Another good suggestion I liked is to pretend you're a journalist at the conference. So that means you're listening for key points that you would be reporting on. And the thought process of thinking like a journalist stops your mind from wandering because it needs to focus on the most important parts of the session. Next is to embrace the opportunity to have what the authors call a brain breather, which is the time you spend at the conference sort of letting the information settle. It can be highly creative and helpful. And lastly, to schedule time after you get back from the conference to review your notes, because taking notes is great. Reviewing them after will help you solidify your takeaways, which makes it more likely that they will be instated in running your program. So I thought these are some pretty original ideas. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention a piece that I wrote, I think last week, that's gone semi-viral, at least viral as things go in the compliance world, about the ridiculous things I saw in my spring conference season. So I went to 3 continents, 13 cities, and 7 different conferences this spring. And in three of them, Tom, a presenter on stage during the panels opened up their phone and answered text messages, emails, whatever it was, actually on stage answering an email. One of these happened during one of my sessions. And I wrote about that. I certainly didn't name names of conferences or individuals, but Erica Salmon Byrne wrote back on a comment that she thinks she would have said to the person, "Excuse me, are we holding you from something urgent?" And I really struggled with whether or not to stop and say, "Are you freaking kidding me?" But I don't know, Tom, is this a thing? What do we need to do at conferences to stop this kind of nonsense?
That was a great article. You really should have named and shamed that person, and you should have shamed them right there. There's no excuse for that. There's no excuse if somebody's watching a video and they forget out in the audience and they forget and leave the audio on. Not that I would know anyone personally who's ever done that. But yeah, it really got me thinking. I would say you and I and our experiences are maybe different than others because we have been in this profession for so long. We know so many people, and that for me, I get as much in the hallways as I do in the presentations. That's overlaid with after COVID, because even this year, I saw people I had not seen since pre-COVID, and it's just this, like I saw Vera Sharafanoa, and I'd seen Vera since 2018. And I'm like, Vera! And it was so much fun to see her in person. And we still have some of those because we're still seeing people we haven't seen for a long time. but there's so much available to you in terms of, as you said, the presentations. I'm a huge fan of the vendor room, and because I learned so much talking to vendors, and I try to talk to vendors I don't know, and there's always a few. So that's one area that I really like to explore. And I know some people take different views of vendors at conferences, but I absolutely think they're a part of the solution. And then the presentations themselves, you're I even told my wife about your article. That's how much it struck me. And I couldn't believe that somebody would literally, why didn't they just take the call? Excuse me, Kristy, I need to take a call. Yeah,
I would have respected that more. You need to take a call, get off the stage, take your call. If it's your kid and there's an emergency, that's fine. But there's nothing that's more important than sitting there doing your panel, for God's sake.
the one thing that it made me realize the best idea I've heard over the past several years is it comes out of the podcast world, not the compliance world. But one guy there, he said that every conference he goes to, he has one dinner where he invites 5 people he doesn't know. And I thought, what a great idea. And he just uses it to expand his group of people within the podcast world. And what a great way to break the ice. And I don't go to a really expensive place, but it's a nice place. And maybe have a burger and meet somebody new and share ideas in an informal setting. I went to a dinner at Compliance Week, and the 3 or 4 people around me, we talked about how we met our spouses. And it was just, I love that when you can do something like that. So there's so many different opportunities at compliance conferences. Actually, I was thinking about, do we need an AI note taker? And the power of taking notes that you mentioned earlier to reinforce the information for you as the listener. A lot going on here. I love the conference season as well. I'm still at the point where I'm just so thrilled to see people and enjoyed all of that. But your article was just great. Even my wife just couldn't believe that.
All right, everybody, we'll link it in the show notes. Okay, Tom, what is the I-9 hell? Is that a freeway?
Maybe in California. I-9 hell. I-9 is the forms you fill out, the number of the immigration form you fill out for employees. And all of us have to fill out an I-9, including Tom and Kristy. Now, we have U.S. passports, so that's prima facie evidence we're U.S. citizens. But also, if you have immigrants, either green card holders or other card holders, they have to be filled out. And what I found interesting about this was several different things. One, anytime I get to hear about document, the hair on the back of my neck's going to stand up. Wow, about time. But the other thing is, I'm not the first one to say this. Many others for many years have said, you want to change immigration in the United States, you go after the employers who are hiring illegal immigrants. And we've got a lot of that now in terms of ICE raids. But I always thought this was the way to do that. If you're serious about that, and you go to the employers and you check to make sure everybody is there, has the right documentation. And if employers are not filling out the documentation correctly, or the government wants to look at somebody's green card, that information is available, and it's available to the government. It's always been available. And so I see this as a natural extension or a part of an overall immigration effort, but I see it as appropriate because it's documentation that companies had to have had. The last corporate job I had was '07, and I had to fill it out then, and it hasn't changed. I think this is an appropriate area for the government to review. People are getting notices and having to document what they say they've been doing. Once again, I find that appropriate. You and I both talk about, what are you going to do when the regulator comes knocking? The immigration regulators come and knocking. And if you haven't completely filled your forms out or they're incorrect, you're subject to fine and penalty. And so I don't really agree that it's I-9 hell. I would call it immigration compliance.
Let's put this in context. So Tom, the original article is from the FT. And
Yes.
It is titled Companies Stuck in I-9 Hell of Paperwork. And basically, it was a lot of discussion about how anytime you see something where there is a one-time fine for each violation of $2,500, $2,600, and you've got 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 or 100,000 employees, this is a very expensive paperwork problem. And yes, they should be filled out correctly, but as the article noted, there are 8 pages of instructions for a one-page form and over 50 combinations of IDs that can be used or identifying documents. So I do think that there is a expensive challenge here that's worth looking at, but you are right. There's definitely a need to document. Luckily, this is mostly HR's problem. So at least we're not going to be stuck in the middle of it from the compliance office. Let's move from hell to arguably either hell or heaven, depending on your point of view. That is the great state of Florida for our latest installment of Florida Man. Are we ready, Tom?
Ready.
Ready. Okay. This time, our Florida man is Henry Anunez Alvarado, who was seriously upset when he wasn't able to finish his leg workout at Planet Fitness in Fort Myers, Florida. So our fitness aficionado was livid when workers told him that the gym was closing and he had to leave. Rather than stopping before finishing his squats, he took off his clothing and ran naked through the gym. He was quite serious about his workout routine, so much so that he took his naked self into the ceiling, crawling around while knocking down tiles from the ceiling. He then landed in the bathroom where he decided to start a fire, perhaps trying to create a smoke screen so he could finish his sit-ups, or he was literally feeling the burn from his workout. Surveillance footage also showed the man laying down completely naked on a hydro massage bed, which I understand because those things are great. And he was eventually tracked down in a tanning bed in the nude. Hopefully he had those little glasses that they give you to protect your eyes. No word on that from the police. Our Florida man has been charged with arson, criminal mischief, providing false information to law enforcement, and indecent exposure. So it's true that when Planet Fitness says it's a no judgment zone, they don't mean that kind of poor judgment.
God bless Florida Man.
God bless Florida Man. And everyone who listens to the Two Gurus talk compliance, I'm Kristy Grant-Hart.
And I'm Tom Fox.